Good morning. My topic for the day is oncology protocols for cholangiocarcinoma. I will start with a short introduction and overview, and then I will talk about the targeted systemic treatments which are available now, and then I will discuss the NCCN guidelines and protocols which we are commonly using, and an algorithm which can be used in our institution. So cholangiocarcinoma is an epithelial malignancy of the bile tract that has a poor prognosis and lacks effective treatments. This is a rare tumor type that accounts for less than 1% of all human cancers. However, it is the second most common malignancy in the liver after HCC, and more than 90% are found to be adenocarcinomas. And based on the location of the tumor, cholangiocarcinomas are divided into three categories: intrahepatic and extrahepatic. Extrahepatic consists of perihilar and distal. This has already been discussed. So this is the intrahepatic cholangiocarcinomas. They are within the liver parenchyma and proximal to the second degree bile ducts. And perihilar and distal cholangiocarcinomas are outside the liver, and they have the cystic duct as the boundary between these two types. And most cholangiocarcinomas are extrahepatic. Perihilar accounts for the majority, 50 to 60%. Intrahepatic cholangiocarcinomas account for only 10 to 20% of cases. The clinical symptoms mainly depend on the anatomic location of the tumor. Patients with intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma usually present late. They have usually vague abdominal pain, unexplained weight loss, weakness, and worsening fatigue. Jaundice and pruritus may not be apparent until very late in the disease course, when there is occlusion of the segmental bile ducts. Patients with perihilar cholangiocarcinoma, they commonly present with jaundice, pruritus, abdominal pain, fever, weight loss, weakness. And patients with distal cholangiocarcinoma, they present early. They have an early onset of jaundice and pruritus without abdominal pain. And these patients usually have a palpable distended gallbladder, Courvoisier's sign. And each of these subtypes also has distinct characteristics in terms of epidemiology, pathology, treatment, and prognosis. Cholangiocarcinoma has a poor prognosis. Despite surgery, the reported 5-year survival rate is only 30%, and radical resection is the only potentially curative method. However, as we know, most of our patients are diagnosed at an advanced stage, and they have no chance of receiving any further surgery. And it is estimated that no more than 30% of intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma patients are able to receive curative surgery. And some points to be considered in the initial workup: early surgical consultation prior to drainage in jaundice patients with a multidisciplinary team is recommended as part of the initial workup for assessment of resectability. Providers should only proceed with biopsy once transplant or resectability status has been determined. For patients with hilar cholangiocarcinoma who may be transplant candidates, transperitoneal biopsy is contraindicated and will likely preclude transplantation based on current protocols. So for patients undergoing resection, biopsy is usually not done, not necessary. When required, intraluminal biopsy is the preferred biopsy approach for potential transplant patients. So just to give a sense of the poor prognosis for these patients, the American Cancer Society released these data of relative survival rate for cancer of bile duct between 2010 and 2016. For intrahepatic cholangiocarcinomas, the localized 5-year survival rate was 25%. For regional disease, 8%. For distant, 2%. Overall, it was 9%. For extrahepatic, localized and regional had more or less the same 5-year survival rate of 15 to 16%. Distant was only 2%. So now we have some new options for these patients, targeted systemic treatments. And there's an increasing role for molecular profiling of cholangiocarcinomas. There are significant differences in the prevalence of oncogenic mutations between intrahepatic and extrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, suggesting that the oncogenic processes of these tumor subtypes are different. So this is an updated table which was published this year. So in extrahepatic, as we can see, TP53 is the most prevalent, 40%. Then we have HER2 overexpression, CDKN2AB loss, KRAS mutation, VEGF overexpression, then SMAD4, EGFR and IDH1/2 mutation. In intrahepatic, CDKN2AB loss, TP53 again, which is very variable from 2.5 to 44.4, and EGFR, and the one of importance right now is IDH1/2. This is more common in intrahepatic, 4.9 to 36%. So in a study by Nakamura et al., comprehensive exome and transcriptome sequencing were performed in 260 patients, 145 with intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, 86 with extrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, and 29 with gallbladder carcinoma. So recurrent mutations in IDH1/2, isocitrate dehydrogenase, FGFR, fibroblast growth factor receptor 123, and BAP1 were primarily present in intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, whereas mutations in ARID1B, ELF3 and PRKACB occurred predominantly in extrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma. The fusion of FGFR2 resulted in the ligand-independent activation of receptor tyrosine kinase. This occurs only in patients with ICC. The new gene fusion involved PRKACA or PRKACB, which encodes a catalytic subunit and a protein kinase A, which has only been detected in extrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma. The identification of these aberrations is important, as gene fusions are recognized as important driver genes. So this shows some of the mutations they have found. In intrahepatic, these are the most common, FGFR2 fusion, IDH1/2. In extrahepatic, PRKACA, PRKACB, followed by ELF3, ARID1B, and these are common to both these variants, KRAS, SMAD4, ARID1A and GNAS mutation. And as we can see here, BRCA1 and 2 is also found, as we have targeted treatments for this, which have already been being used for breast cancer. So this figure shows the key signaling pathways in the pathogenesis of cholangiocarcinoma and relative targeted agents. Genetic alterations in tyrosine kinase receptors, which we can see here, and downstream RAS, MAPK, PI3K, AKT, mTOR effector cascades. This results in aberrant modulation of proliferation, apoptosis, and cell cycle. Mutated IDH1, which is here, and IDH2, these result in the accumulation of oncogenic metabolite 2-HG in the cell. So, understanding the molecular biology of these cancers is very important, as this has led to the formulation of a number of drugs. IDH1/2 mutations, we have IDH inhibitors. CDKN2AB, we have CDK4/6 inhibitors. Then FGFR2 amplification, FGFR inhibitors. PARP inhibitors, which are already being used for breast cancer. Then immune checkpoint inhibitors, as we know, for PD-L1 or MSI-high patients. So ivosidenib is one of the drugs which is approved. IDH1/2 mutations are found in 10 to 23% of intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma. IDH1 mutation, which accounts for 0.8% of patients with extrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, is associated with poor prognosis in these patients. A phase 3 study with 185 patients with advanced IDH1 mutant cholangiocarcinoma resulted in significant improvement in progression-free survival, 2.7 months versus 1.4 months, and hazard ratio was 0.37, and it was statistically significant when they were treated with ivosidenib, an IDH1 inhibitor, compared to placebo. So this drug is included as a subsequent line treatment option for unresectable or metastatic cholangiocarcinoma with IDH1 mutations following disease progression. This was the study which led to this approval, and 186 patients who had good performance status, IDH1 mutation, and had already received 1 to 2 prior lines of treatment. They were randomized to 2 cohorts, either ivosidenib or placebo, and The median PFS was 2.7 months in the ivosidenib group and 1.4 months in the placebo group. 6-month rate 32%, 12-month rate 22%. Disease control rate was 53%. Then pemigatinib. Mutations in FGFR2 fusions have been found in 13 to 14% of intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, and these mutations are associated with favorable prognosis. In the phase 2 FIGHT 202 clinical trial, pemigatinib, an FGFR inhibitor, demonstrated promising therapeutic potential with 35.5% of patients with cholangiocarcinoma and FGFR2 fusions or rearrangements achieving an objective response. This was a FIGHT 202 trial data. Advanced unresectable cholangiocarcinoma patients with one prior therapy. They were divided into 3 cohorts. The cohort A had FGFR2 fusion translocation, cohort 2 had other FGFR alterations, and cohort 3 had no FGFR alterations. And this was the response rate in the FGFR2 fusion rearrangement, 35% of response rate. Cohort A achieved a median overall survival of 21.1 months compared to 6.7 months in cohort B and 4 months in cohort C. And infigratinib, this is another FGFR inhibitor. In another phase 2 study, treatment with infigratinib, an FGFR 1-3 inhibitor, led to an overall response rate of 23.1% in patients with previously treated advanced or metastatic cholangiocarcinoma with FGFR2 fusion or rearrangements. The median duration of response was 5 months and the median PFS was 7.3 months. Pemigatinib and infigratinib are included as subsequent line treatment options for unresectable or metastatic cholangiocarcinoma having FGFR2 fusions or rearrangements following disease progression. And this was the data for infigratinib. So as we can see, most of the responses were in the FGFR2 fusion. So most of the responses were in this cohort, and now these 2 drugs are approved for second line treatment. NTRK inhibitors, NTRK fusion genes were identified in 0.75% of patients with biliary tract tumors, and NTRK inhibitors like entrectinib and larotrectinib have shown efficacy, and these 2 are now included as first line or subsequent line treatment options for unresectable or metastatic disease with NTRK gene fusions. Then we come to immune checkpoint inhibitors. Studies have indicated that MSI high, deficient MMR and TMB high tumors are sensitive to PD-1 blockade. The phase 2 Keynote 158 study investigated the use of pembrolizumab in patients with advanced non-colorectal MSI high tumors. Analysis of a cholangiocarcinoma subgroup revealed an ORR of 40.9%. The median PFS was 4.2 months and overall survival was 24.3 months. Data from this study also revealed that patients with a TMB high status could have a robust response to pembrolizumab. 29% of patients in the TMB high group achieved an objective response compared to only 6% in the non-TMB high arm. Among 4 patients with deficient MMR cholangiocarcinoma who received pembrolizumab, 1 patient had a complete remission and the remaining patients had stable disease. Based on these studies, the FDA has expanded pembrolizumab approval in 2017 and 2020 to include treatment of unresectable or metastatic MSI high, deficient MMR or TMB high solid tumors that have progressed following prior treatment and they have no other satisfactory treatment options. Nivolumab has also been studied in biliary cancers. So this study gave the 54 patients were taken who had already undergone 1 to 3 lines of therapy, and they found a response rate of 22%. However, the independent review showed a response rate of 11%. Median PFS was 3.5 months, overall survival 14.2 months. And combination therapies are also being studied. Initial results from the phase 2 LEAP-005 trial examined the combination of lenvatinib with pembrolizumab as a subsequent therapy for patients with advanced biliary tract disease. This demonstrated an overall response rate of 9.7% with a median PFS of 6.1 months. when we look at the response rates and the PFS in months, the first thing that comes to mind is that this is a very low figure, but we have to remember that these are patients who had no other treatment option at that time and would be put on best support care otherwise. So that these figures are significant. So this combination of lenvatinib and pembrolizumab is included as category B, subsequent line treatment option. Then we come to the NCCN guidelines. These are the ones we are usually following. They are evidence-based and they are updated very frequently. And for intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, this is the flow chart. These patients present as isolated intrahepatic mass, and the imaging is found to be not consistent with HCC. The initial workup, as we are doing, history and physical followed by imaging, tumor markers and biochemical markers. Surgical consultation should be done in the initial stages itself, and biopsy can be considered if the patient is deemed to be unresectable, otherwise should not be done. So these patients are put into one of these three groups, either resectable, unresectable, locally advanced or metastatic disease. So patients who are resectable, they go on to staging lab followed by resection and regional lymphadenectomy. And we will cover this in the next slide. Patients who are unresectable or metastatic, they are usually treated in more or less the same way. Molecular testing is advised, mainly MSI high and TMB. The options range from systemic therapy, radiation therapy with chemotherapy, only locoregional therapy, and which will include radiation therapy and arterially directed therapies like TACE or TARE. In metastatic disease, it's mainly systemic therapy and locoregional therapy as palliation. So patients who have undergone surgery, they are assessed for the need for adjuvant therapy. If it is an R0 resection, then the options range from observation, systemic therapy or clinical trial. If the patients had an R1 resection or the nodes were positive, then adjuvant therapy is given. It can be systemic therapy, it can be radiation or a combination of these two. No, there are no randomized trials till date to tell us which of these is better. And if it's an R2 resection, then they go to treatment as unresectable disease. And surveillance, patients who are operated, they go into these surveillance groups. Every 3 to 6 months, imaging in the form of CT or MRI is to be done for 2 years. After that, every 6 to 12 months for up to 5 years, whereas clinically indicated patient individually to be decided. And when we have a patient with extrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma, so this is the usual presentation. They will come with pain, abdomen, jaundice, obstructive jaundice, abnormal LFTs. And after the initial workup, which again consists of history and physical examination, imaging, the tumor markers, we have to remember they should not be used for diagnosis. They're only used as a supportive evidence. And we should consider endoscopic ultrasound after surgical consultation. And in these patients, serum IgG4 is also done to rule out autoimmune cholangitis. So again, these patients are put into one of these three groups, resectable or unresectable or metastatic. Resectable patients go on to have surgery, and unresectable or metastatic are again treated with biliary drainage if indicated, biopsy if surgery or transplant has been ruled out, and molecular testing. And the treatment options are again systemic therapy, radiation therapy with chemotherapy or as a palliative modality, and best supportive care. And here I would like to stress that biliary drainage is not mandatory before surgery, but it is to be considered before chemotherapy or radiotherapy, patients going on to medical treatment. And again, post-resection, R0 patients will go to either they can go for observation, systemic therapy or chemoradiation therapy as adjuvant treatment. And if patients are R1 or they have positive nodes, then systemic therapy, chemoradiation, or a combination of these two. And our 2 patients will be treated as unresectable disease, and surveillance as for the intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma. So the systemic treatments, the chemotherapy which we are using, this was a first phase 3 randomized trial for adjuvant chemotherapy, BILCAP trial. This had 2 cohorts, adjuvant capecitabine and observation only. They showed a median relapse-free survival of 24.6 months compared to 17.6 months in the observation group. So now this has become the standard of care for adjuvant chemotherapy. For unresectable or metastatic disease, as we know, gemcitabine, cisplatin is the standard of treatment, and the figures are from the ABC2 and the BT22 trials. When they compared patients who were only on best supportive care, the median survival was 2.5 to 4.5 months. With GemCis, the PFS went up to 8 months, and it was only 5 months with single agent gemcitabine. And the overall survival went to 11.7 months, and it was 8.1 months with single agent gemcitabine. So in second line treatment, FOLFOX has been approved as the preferable treatment, and this has shown in this chemotherapy regimen has shown an increase of median overall survival to 6.2 months over 5.3 months for support care only. So these are the treatment regimens we are using. For neoadjuvant therapy, no regimen is considered to be a preferred regimen because no trial has till now shown a survival benefit. These regimens are used when indicated, mainly in borderline resectable cases. For adjuvant therapy, capecitabine, as we have discussed, is category 1, and all these regimens can be used. These are in this flowchart because of retrospective and individual institutional data, but no randomized head-to-head trials have been done between these chemotherapy regimens. Then when we treat unresectable and metastatic disease, gemcitabine, cisplatin is category 1, FOLFOX is preferred regimen for subsequent line therapy, and these regimens can be used. FOLFIRI and regorafenib have also been approved for subsequent line therapy. And this is the interesting part. If these patients have these molecular abnormalities, then these drugs can be used. And these are tumor agnostic drugs, can be used in any solid tumor with these molecular markers. So NTRK gene fusion positive tumors, entrectinib, larotrectinib, MSI high, pembrolizumab. And for cholangiocarcinoma, we have these new drugs which we have already discussed: FGFR2 fusion, pemigatinib, infigratinib, IDH1 mutation, ivosidenib, BRAF V600E, dabrafenib and trametinib, and nivolumab, and now lenvatinib plus pembro is category 2B presently. So putting together all these points and data we have discussed, so this is a basic algorithm for our patients with biliary tract cancer. The initial workup should be done very carefully, and the main point to be decided is whether they are eligible for surgery or transplant. Subsequent to this, as per the requirement, they can undergo adjuvant treatment followed by surveillance. Locally advanced metastatic molecular testing should become mandatory in our institution, followed by systemic therapy as per the results. Loco-regional therapy is to be decided individually as per the patients, and best support care should be given to all the patients irrespective of the stage. Thank you.